Let me get something out of the way right now. I want to be completely upfront with you before we begin. Because this case feels different, I have followed it closely from the very beginning. That 40-minute audio file, the bartender, the Apple Watch, the flare that fired the wrong way, and the boatyard just 150 yards north, glowing like a stadium. The witness at 9:30. I have looked at all of it. But what Karli said to Brian Entin this week, I keep returning to it. Not because it is the most dramatic thing anyone has said. It simply is not. She did not scream. She did not cry on camera. She remained calm. It was almost too calm for someone delivering that kind of news. And maybe that is what got me, because calm is not what you expect when someone is about to tell you that 2 years before her mother vanished, 2 years, the man her mother lived with on that boat told her precisely how it was going to happen. Not vaguely, not as some poetic metaphor, not like the empty threats people throw around in the heat of a screaming match that do not actually mean anything concrete. He promised he would make sure this exact thing would happen to her. Those are Karli's actual words, said publicly, right on the record, to Brian Entin on his investigative show, broadcast by News Nation on May 18th, 2026. We are following a dark path. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old, and she came from Onstead, Michigan. She walked away from her home, her career, and a normal life on land to sail across the Caribbean on a 46-foot sloop with the husband she married. For 4 years, she captured that dream life. Sea turtles, glowing sunsets, fresh cinnamon rolls baking in a solar oven. Those perfect mornings that make folks back home stop scrolling and just stare. Her last Instagram caption said, "Not going anywhere for a little while." She has been missing ever since April 4th, 2026. 45 days now, no charges have been filed, but the investigation remains active. The Soulmate, the white-hulled 46-foot sloop that served as their home, is in Fort Pierce, Florida. It is currently held in federal custody behind crime scene tape as the investigation led by the Coast Guard Investigative Service continues. Before we go any further, please hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Every detail in this episode comes directly from verified, sourced public reporting. Every claim is carefully attributed. Every expert is named. I do not speculate. If I say something happened, I can show you exactly where it was reported and who said it. Now, let us focus on Karli. Her full name is Karli Aylesworth, and she is Lynette's daughter. She has spoken openly about this nightmare from day one, appearing on the Today Show, CNN, and ABC News. Her story has remained completely consistent. She's been extremely careful, never saying things that she could not back up. So, when she sat down with journalist Brian Entin for his News Nation program and uttered those words this past week, I sat up and paid very close attention. Here is exactly what she told him. She said that 2 years ago, roughly 2 years before Lynette vanished, she became aware of a specific threat made against her. That threat centered on what Brian Hooker had allegedly promised he would do to her. She laid it out this way, and I am paraphrasing directly from that public News Nation report on May 18th, that he had already delivered this chilling threat 2 full years ago, stating that this exact tragedy was going to happen to Lynette, and he would personally make sure it happened. And then she said something I want to be extremely careful to present accurately, because the precise phrasing matters so much here. According to News Nation, her exact words were that he has threatened it. She was pretty sure he did it multiple times. Multiple times. Not once. Not during one argument on a single bad night. Multiple times. And then, and this is the exact part I keep returning to, she said something that is not dramatic at all. It sounded almost casual, which makes it feel so much worse. She said it is just funny because he warned her he was going to do this, and now it is actually happening. Just sit with that. She is not crying. She is not yelling or screaming. She is just pointing at something she sees with absolute clarity and calm. Something she has apparently known for a long time. He promised he would go through with it. And now, it is actually happening. I need to be incredibly precise right here about what this is and what it is not. This is a public statement from Lynette's daughter, reported by News Nation on May 18, 2026. Following a direct interview conducted by journalist Brian Entin. This is her personal account of what she was told. It is not hard physical evidence, and it has not been entered into any court proceeding. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime, and his attorney states that he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing. Every individual referenced here is presumed entirely innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law. That is the complete legal picture. But then, there is the devastating picture that Karli painted. She did not stop there. She also described a very specific, terrifying incident. This was a moment, she said, her mother told her about not just a general pattern, but one specific event. Based on the News Nation report from May 18th, Karli recounted a dark incident from years earlier when her mother said Brian Hooker actually choked her rather than just pushing her. He did not just grab her arm. He actively choked her. And during that exact same confrontation, that very same one, he threatened to kill her and throw her overboard. Lynette left right after that. And according to Karli, she fled immediately after that specific incident. Yet, she went back just a couple of months later. Karli said her mother returned, and I have been thinking about that constantly since I first read it, because I do not think most people really understand how that actually happens, how someone can hear something so terrifying from a person they live with, run away because of it, and then somehow go right back. It makes absolutely no sense from the outside. And that is precisely why the whole cycle gets so heavily misunderstood. The deep psychology behind these painful situations is never simple. This is not some simple math problem with a neat, clean solution. It involves long years of deeply shared history and heavy financial ties that are almost impossible to see from the outside. It also involves complex emotional patterns that took a very long time to build and simply cannot be undone in a single afternoon. It is that sincere, desperate, and not completely naive belief that the person you chose to love is genuinely capable of being better than they were in their absolute darkest moment. Lynette actually had a ticket. On March 11th, 2026, she held a plane ticket right out of that nightmare. She had booked it. She had carefully planned it, and she had told close people about it. But she never used it. Just 24 days later, she was gone. Karli knew all about that threat, and she knew about the choking incident. Karli knew about those exact, terrifying words about being thrown overboard. She knew every single detail, and yet, she still could not stop the worst from happening. I think about that constantly, too. Now, I want to take a moment and focus on something I have not seen anyone properly connect yet this week, because Karli's statement is the newest piece. But it definitely does not come from nowhere. It lands right inside a disturbing pattern that has been steadily building in the public record for months. When you closely study that pattern, do not just look at it as a sterile timeline or some neat list of events. Look at it as the slow, painful way a real human being would gradually realize what they are actually staring at. It is incredibly uncomfortable. But let me explain exactly what I mean. Let us start right here. Back in January 2026, a full 3 months before Lynette vanished, Karli publicly confirmed that Lynette told her Brian had threatened to throw her overboard. That is reported, and it is fully confirmed. Karli openly said it, and several news outlets covered the story in January 2026, exactly 3 months before April 4th. Now, hold on to that thought, and then look at what Karli said this week. She stated that this very same threat was made roughly 2 years prior to the disappearance. That was back in 2024, when he specifically said this exact thing would happen to her, and that he would personally make sure it did. So, we are not talking about a single moment of alleged anger that someone just said and immediately forgot. We are talking about a threat that, according to Karli's own public account, was made in 2024 and then repeated again in January 2026. This was the exact same method and the exact same words, repeated over and over. That does not look like a pattern of simple volatility. That is something much darker. And then there is this. When I read through the 2015 court records, which remain a matter of public record, confirmed by multiple outlets, what strikes me is not actually the arrest itself. What really strikes me is that even back then, 11 years ago, Lynette filed a report about that exact same incident, and she claimed that he choked her. Back in 2015, she said he choked her. Then, in 2024, Karli claims he promised to make sure this exact thing happened. In January 2026, according to Karli, he threatened to throw her right overboard. On April 4th, 2026, she completely vanished, right from a boat. But I am not connecting those dots for you. I am simply putting them right in front of you, exactly as they exist in the public record, and letting you look at them. Because here is the thing I keep getting stuck on. Karli was not surprised at all. And that is the one part of her interview people are ignoring. She was not shocked when her mother vanished. Horrified and devastated, yes. But she was definitely not surprised. She said, and I want to report this as accurately as possible from the News Nation coverage, "It is just funny because he said he was going to do this. And now it is actually happening." So, why on earth would I just believe your story? At this point, I would need real answers, not just a story. Why would I ever just believe your side of things? She already knew what happened. Or at least, she had heard that alleged version years before it ever became a news headline. Hearing it straight from her own mother, she carried it. So when it finally happened, she recognized it instantly. That is not a daughter who is just reading into things. That is a daughter carrying the massive, heavy weight of something she could never stop. Now, let me bring in Blaine Stevenson, because Blaine was actually a friend of Brian, not of Lynette. He was a very close friend of Brian. They sailed together and trusted each other. So when Lynette vanished, Brian immediately called Blaine. They spoke for 40 minutes. And Blaine recorded that call and handed it to investigators. Just think about that for a moment. Brian called his own close friend. His own friend recorded him and then turned that tape over to investigators. That recording, verified by CBS News, caught Brian saying she basically bounced off the dinghy. But what Blaine said this week in statements reported by News Nation is something I want to focus on completely apart from that tape. He noted that at no point did Brian truly look at the situation and offer anyone any more details than he had at the very beginning. Back when he was supposedly in shock, supposedly, it was Brian's friend who used that word, not Karli, not the investigators, not some journalist who has been highly skeptical of Brian's account from the very start. His own friend, supposedly in deep shock. I do not know exactly what Blaine meant by that word, and I will not pretend, but I certainly notice it, and I notice exactly where it came from. Now, let us look closely at the physical record, and I want to approach this quite a bit differently than we have done in previous episodes. If you are following this case, please subscribe to the channel, but you probably know the basics. You know all about the AIS data. You know the boatyard. And you know about the crucial 9:30 witness. So, instead of just walking through that same timeline again, I want to ask you to view it from a totally different angle today. Because that statement from Karli completely changed how I see everything now. Not the actual events, those facts remain the same, but the frame around them. Let me explain exactly what I mean. When this case first started, the questions were about plausibility. Does Brian's account actually make physical sense? Can the weather, the local geography, and the timestamps be reconciled with what he says? Is it actually possible, just mechanically speaking, that things happened exactly the way he described? Those questions are still completely valid, and the answers from Jim Todd, from the AIS records, from the 9:30 witness, and from the surveillance footage at 6:38 p.m. show them leaving 52 minutes before Brian told investigators they departed. Those answers have consistently raised major issues for Brian's own version of events. But Karli's statement this week completely shifts the entire question. Now, it is not just about whether his story is physically possible. It is about whether that story was ever truly meant to represent the actual truth. And that is a completely different question. A story that fails to add up mechanically and cannot explain the AIS gap. A story that cannot explain the 9:30 noise from the Soulmate. That still does not explain why a man wearing slides walked away from a boatyard that was glowing like a landing strip just 150 yards away. An isolated story like that is one thing. But a story that unfolds against the backdrop of a very specific alleged threat, repeated time and again, about this precise method, that is something investigators are going to have to weigh very carefully alongside all the other evidence. Let us look at what the physical evidence actually shows right now, as of today. The vessel named Soulmate is docked at the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station in Florida. That is absolutely confirmed. The boat has been sitting there since May 10th, Mother's Day, arriving just after being seized by the Coast Guard, roughly 40 nautical miles off Melbourne, Florida, on May 9th. On May 13th, yellow crime scene tape went up around the entire vessel, not a moment before 3 full days after it first arrived. 3 days of unknown activity we cannot identify because the Coast Guard has stayed completely silent on the matter. Then, finally, the tape went up. Fox News Digital obtained exclusive photographs showing the tape. Investigators in black shirts with yellow letters spelling out CGIS and blue gloves were photographed actively processing the entire vessel. Evidence bags were seen being carried off the boat. Ashley Banfield, who has consistently remained ahead of every major development in this case, confirmed through a highly trusted source she calls one of the absolute best she has on this story, that whatever investigators uncovered on board the Soulmate amounts to what she described as a literal forensic gold mine. A forensic gold mine. I do not use those words lightly, and Ashley Banfield does not trust her sources lightly. She has spent 36 years in journalism. When she uses a heavy phrase like that and attributes it to a strong source, it means someone left something on that boat investigators did not expect to find. Or they finally found solid proof of what they already suspected. We still do not know what it is. The Coast Guard has confirmed only that this investigation remains active, and that absolutely no additional details will be released to the public at this time. But here is what strikes me this week. Now that Karli has finally spoken out, whatever resides inside those evidence bags came off a boat where, according to the public record, a very specific threat involving a specific method was allegedly made over and over for years. The forensic science does not know about that threat. The threat does not know anything about the forensic science. They exist completely independent of each other, but investigators are fully aware of both. And that is exactly the kind of convergence that shifts an entire investigation. Let us talk about Darlene, because I do not want this episode to focus solely on what Karli said, because there is another woman in this story who has been carrying a heavy weight of knowledge most of us would not know how to bear. Darlene Hamlet is 76 years old now. She is Lynette's mother, living in Florida, and she has been waiting since April 5th for any real news about her daughter. Jim Todd, a volunteer with Hopetown Fire and Rescue, was one of the very first people on the scene the morning of April 5th. And he shared something in his interview with Ashley Banfield on May 16th that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He explained that Darlene spoke to Ashley in private, not to the media at large, to Ashley specifically, that the absolute last time Lynette was with her, she warned her not to return because she truly believed he was going to end her life. Those are Darlene's agonizing words. A mother looked directly at her daughter the very last time they were together and uttered those terrifying words. And yet, Lynette left anyway, heading straight back to that boat. Darlene knew. Karli knew. Two women who loved Lynette more than life itself. One her mother, the other her daughter, both carrying this heavy knowledge, both completely powerless to stop what was coming. I'm going to let that sink in for a moment, because there is absolutely nothing I can add that would make it any easier to digest. And I do not want to try. There is a deep question I have been wrestling with since this case first began, and it is not really an investigative riddle. It is something much more human. What does it truly take? What tragic combination of love, fear, history, and fragile hope causes a woman to hear what Lynette heard, know what she knew, and still step onto that boat? I keep thinking about that ticket she booked, March 11th. She made her decision. She mapped it out. She took the definitive step of booking the ticket, which means she stared at a departure date on her screen and realized, that is the exact day I leave. But then she did not. I do not say that to judge her. I say this because it reveals something deeply important about the way these messy situations work, and why they are hard to understand from the outside, about why the family and friends who love someone in this trap feel so completely helpless, even when they can see exactly what is happening. Darlene saw it, said it out loud. Lynette heard her, but still chose to go back. That is not weakness. That is one of the most human, messy, and deeply heartbreaking things that ever happens in these kinds of relationships. And I truly believe Lynette deserves to have that recognized, not as some personal failure, but as the hard, complicated truth of the situation she lived through. Now, let us look closely at what Karli told Brian Entin about that timeline, because her statement this week was not just about the specific threat. She openly doubts the timeline. She doubts the exact circumstances. And she insists that far too many questions remain completely unanswered. That is nothing new for Karli. She has been highly skeptical of Brian's account since that very first phone call. The one where he explained what happened in what she described as a flat, monotone, and entirely relaxed voice. Completely flat and relaxed. Her own mother was missing. She had only just received the call, and the man on the other end of that line sounded completely monotone and relaxed. That was on April 5th. That was the very first thing Karli shared publicly. And now, 45 days later, she is adding a critical new layer that changes the whole timeline question entirely. Not just whether his story makes physical sense, but whether it makes any sense given what she knows was allegedly threatened 2 full years before she disappeared. I keep returning to a point that Jim Todd told Ashley Banfield in their interview on May 16th. He described closely watching Brian on board the rescue vessel early that morning, right after they picked him up from the shore and before they headed back toward the Soulmate. He explained that when he tried to pinpoint exactly where Lynette went overboard, pointing to various locations and asking questions, Brian just kept saying he did not know, that he was simply too confused, just so confused. Jim Todd noted something that I found to be incredibly perceptive. He brought up descriptions he had seen of how individuals who are lying often have a highly detailed narrative they can easily walk you through. But when you ask them a question adjacent to that story, something they did not rehearse, they completely freeze. Brian had a detailed story, and he could easily walk right through it. In fact, he had repeated it multiple times by the time he boarded that rescue vessel. Yet when Jim Todd pointed at a specific location, When he asked where exactly, Brian claimed he did not know. And Jim Todd certainly noted that. He noticed it while sitting on that rescue vessel that morning, watching Brian's face and asking questions. He caught it. That observation is now part of the official public record, since Jim Todd stated it directly to Ashley Banfield. It has been reported. And it sits quietly alongside everything else. Let me step back for a brief moment, because I believe it is genuinely important to acknowledge exactly what we still do not know. We do not know what is inside those evidence bags that came off the Soulmate. We do not know what the forensic analysis of the vessel has shown investigators. We do not know what the subpoenaed cell tower data has revealed to investigators. Based on earlier reporting regarding who was where on the night of April 4th. And we do not know what the FLIR camera system on the Soulmate recorded. We do not know what the Raymarine autopilot logs show. We do not know what Brian's Apple Watch data, or Lynette's Apple Watch, which was found on the Soulmate and confirmed by the Coast Guard to Darlene, actually recorded that night. We do not know any of that because it has not been released. Because this active investigation is ongoing, and because the Coast Guard has specifically stated that they are not releasing any additional details at this time, what we do know is that they recovered something they publicly called a gold mine. And we know that whatever they found is part of the same investigation that now also includes Karli's public statement about a specific threat made 2 years before Lynette vanished. Those two critical pieces, the physical forensics and the witness testimonies, are both sitting with the exact same federal investigators right now. And eventually, those federal agents are going to have to decide exactly what to do with everything they have uncovered. But let us pause and look at something that often gets completely buried in the chaotic media coverage of this dark case. These federal institutions move painfully slow. They do not broadcast their progress. They do not hold weekly press briefings. They will not show their hand or reveal what they found until they are ready to make a move. That silence is frustrating. I understand why. I have lived with that exact same frustration while tracking this case. But the Coast Guard Investigative Service did not just seize a sailboat, tow it 40 miles to Fort Pierce, and wrap it in yellow tape, sending agents in blue gloves to carry out heavy bags of evidence, and officially call this an active criminal investigation, just to go through the motions. They set up a highly coordinated surveillance and interception dragnet, using aircraft from Air Station Miami, along with patrol boats from Sector Miami, specifically to corner the Soulmate before it crossed into American territory. Air support. Planes in the sky. This entire operation was planned, coordinated, and incredibly deliberate. Maritime law expert Kenneth Engerand, a professor at the University of Houston Law Center, confirmed to Fox News Digital that the Coast Guard needs no warrant to search that vessel. Furthermore, they can actually file criminal charges without ever recovering Lynette's body. And once their crosshairs focus on one specific suspect, they only need reasonable suspicion. His perspective cleanly captures exactly where this federal investigation stands today. He noted that the legal framework exists. The full authority is there. What investigators are doing right now is quietly building the case to use it. They are gathering their pieces. And as of this week, their growing case includes a chilling statement that Karli placed directly onto the public record. She revealed that the man whose boat is being searched allegedly warned 2 years ago that this exact scenario would happen. I want to bring this back to Lynette because I always return to her. And we must. She was 55 years old, a woman originally from Michigan. She was incredibly brave. Or perhaps just deeply hopeful, which is its own quiet courage. Selling off everything she owned to live out on the open ocean. She documented her journey. She shared it online. She constantly called it her happy place. Her daughter sat before a camera this week, recounting exactly what her mother had told her years before she vanished. She was calm, showing no performative drama. Just the hollow grief of someone who saw the storm coming but could not stop it. Her mother warned her never to go back, but she went back. Now, somewhere inside a federal evidence warehouse in Fort Pierce, Florida, sit piles of bags taken from that 46-foot white sailboat. The vessel Lynette called her home for 4 straight years. And inside those sealed bags, if what Ashley Banfield's source claims is true, lies a massive trove of forensic evidence. The raw truth of what occurred on April 4th, 2026, out in the dark waters near Elbow Cay in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas, is not fully public knowledge yet, but it exists somewhere. It is locked inside those plastic bags. It is hidden in the testimony investigators are putting together. It is deeply rooted in what Karli revealed this week to Brian Entin, and Lynette absolutely deserves for all of this evidence to finally lead somewhere, to an actual courtroom, to real answers, and to the truth her daughter and mother have desperately awaited since April 5th. That is what this investigation owes her. The evidence owes her nothing less. To be absolutely clear, Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His defense attorney states he completely denies any wrongdoing. Remember, everyone mentioned in this report is presumed innocent unless they are formally charged and convicted in a court of law. If you hold any information whatsoever regarding the sudden disappearance of Lynette Hooker, please contact the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service through their anonymous tips app, available on all mobile platforms. The parallel investigation by the Royal Bahamas Police Force also remains active. Both contact links are in the description below. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Onstead, Michigan, and always called the ocean her happy place. This week, her daughter sat before a lens and spoke with quiet, unvarnished truth. With the quiet calm of someone who has carried this weight for years, she revealed that the man she returned to predicted this exact outcome 2 full years before it actually happened. Make sure to subscribe, because every single victim deserves the truth, and every story deserves to be told.